In this episode of Investors and Operators, I sit down with Leon Brujis, who is a partner and head of origination for Palladium Equity Partners. Leon, it is awesome to have you here. Can you give a high level on your background and Palladium?
Jordan, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be talking to you. In terms of background about myself, I'm originally from Argentina. I was actually born in Mexico, and my parents are from Peru. We moved to the U.S. in 2000, and we moved to D.C. and I went to school at GW. And from there, I got a job at Leon Brujis doing M&A, and right before the financial crisis, I was lucky enough to move to Palladium Equity, where I've been there ever since.
Nice. What's the high level on Palladium? I mean, I know a lot of people obviously know the name, but can you refresh our minds?
Yeah, no. Palladium, it's a 24-year-old private equity fund. We're currently managing $3 billion of assets. The firm has raised 5 successively larger funds, and our Fund 5 has commitments in excess of $1.5 billion. Our story is a story of transformation. We like to partner with founders and families and help them be the catalyst for growth. And typically what we like to do is to find a path to more than double the size of the business during our ownership. And we do that through a variety of tools and skills that we've developed over the many decades we've been in business. And I'm very proud to say that the average company of Palladium has more than doubled its size during our ownership.
That's awesome. And what's the general size and shape of the businesses that you look at investing in?
Yeah, it's usually, we look at profits, specifically at EBITDA, and typically we say that we like to make investments in companies between 10 and 50 of EBITDA, and we like to make equity investments of 50 to 150 of equity.
Okay, so I would love to know some of the key choices and parts of your life that you think have led you down this path to now being a partner at Palladium. Like, you've clearly made a ton of good choices here. So I'd love to, rewind a little bit and just learn a little bit more about your story and some of the choices.
Sure. So as I said, originally from Mexico, I was raised in Argentina. My parents are from Peru. We moved to the US in 2000, and I had no idea about the college admission process. I had no idea about SATs, AP credits, essays, none of that stuff. And this was in the summer of 2000, so I had to find something to do. And when you talk about choices, one of the things that has stayed with me throughout my career is finding creative solutions. And I attribute that to the fact that I have a non-traditional background. And so when I came to the US, my dad was working in the DC area, and that's where my whole family moved. And so I looked at the schools in the area, and GW had a program that I was interested in. So as it turns out, you can take classes in college as a non-degree student without having to take SATs or anything else. And so I took the classes that I would have taken if I would have been a first-year student in the engineering school. And then I did well, and I applied as an internal transfer 6 months later and just got into school. No SATs.
I like that. I should have done that because my SAT scores and GMAT and everything else are horrendous. That was a much more creative solution. Wow. Okay. Let's keep on going. What else?
So I spent all 4 years focused on engineering, and my first job was at Fannie Mae, the mortgage giant. And because of my background in engineering, I started in the technology division. Very early on, I realized that was not going to be that was not something I was passionate about. And I networked my way into Fannie Mae's trading floor, and that was exhilarating. And that's when I decided that I needed to come to Wall Street. And unfortunately, the issue that I was having at trying to get a job at Fannie Mae was that they were not sponsoring for a visa. And so I'm an international student, and I was at the time an international student, and they just couldn't sponsor me. So I was in my senior year. I had the internship with Fannie Mae was coming to an end. I couldn't get a job there. I had done well in school. I had good extracurricular activities, but I had the wrong attitude. I thought that because having a high GPA and all of these extracurriculars, jobs were gonna come to me, and that was not the case. And that was particularly exacerbated by the fact that it's just, as an international student, getting a job is just difficult because many companies just don't sponsor international students. So and I had an even worse situation, because my dad, because of he just retired from the World Bank. I couldn't be under his visa, and I was under a student visa. And when you graduate from your senior year, you have 90 days, at least at the time. I don't know if laws have changed, but you have 90 days to get a job, or you have to leave the country. But I had nowhere to go. So I went, and in an effort to get a job, I went to my professors and said, can you, through your network, help me get a job? And I interviewed and got an offer from a small electrical forecasting business, not what I wanted to do, and they would enable me, that job would enable me to stay in the US, which was my ultimate objective. In a twist of fate, and this, you can file this in everything happens for a reason category, I received a call saying that they were rescinding the offer, in part due to complications of getting the visa. So at that moment, it was a bit of a rock bottom. And I was fortunate that I was offered a scholarship at GW to do a 1-year master's. Okay. And I remember at that time having a conversation with my father, where he told me about the conquistador Hernan Cortez. When he came to the shores of America, he burned the ships to let his people know that the only way was forward. And I felt that was a burning the ships moment for me. And it was do or die, so to speak. So I spent more than half of my time that next year focused on landing a job. And I didn't want any job. I wanted a job in Wall Street. I wanted to come to New York, and I wanted to have that experience. So I had a spreadsheet where every contact that I had, I became an expert networker, which it came in handy later in life. And I went to every possible career fair in the DC area that I could, in order to network and find opportunities. And I always get a kick of saying this, but I went to the Women's Career Fair in the DC area. But ultimately, it was at Howard University that I found the most opportunities. And I was fortunate to interview with, I think if my memory serves me right, it was about 9 banks, and I got 2 offers. One with HSBC to be a trader, and a second one with Lehman Brothers to be an investment banker. And that was an incredible moment in my life. It was a moment where, you know, I stared at the abyss, and I think when you stare at the abyss, you get to see what you're made of. And I felt like that moment helped me see what I was capable of, and where failure was not an option. And I was able to get the job, move to New York, and pursue the career that I wanted.
So what do you think that you're made of? How would you define your characteristics? Like, you know, in the summary of your life, it's like Leon Brujis was made of this. What does that mean?
So the you know, it's a great question in terms of what I'm made of. I think the you know, whenever you talk about someone being good at something, let me answer to you through a story. So I used to go to the same hairdresser in DC, and you know, you always talk to your hairdresser, and she told me, look, I don't know what my kids are gonna do, but I told them whatever they're gonna do, they need to do it well. If they're gonna be a gardener, I want them to be the best gardener they can be. If they wanna be a hairdresser, I want them to be the best hairdresser. And so that pursuit of excellence is and that story really inspired me to always try to improve and do the best I can. And you realize after a while that you're gonna do the best you can when you're passionate about something, okay? But passion is just the beginning. You've heard the phrase, you know, it's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration. And so I think what I'm made of is recognizing passion, but having the discipline to follow through. So if you think about the journey of anyone accomplishing anything great, you know, you start with uninformed optimism, right? And then as you learn more about whatever you're trying to do, you get informed pessimism, and then you get to what's called the valley of despair. And that's where I think most people get stuck. And I've been fortunate.
The valley of despair.
The valley of despair.
Well, I'm familiar with that for the past 4 years of entrepreneurship.
There you go. Well, but you know, being in entrepreneurship, you know that it's at those moments. That's at those moments, if you're able to push through and get through that, is when you get to inform optimism, and you get realization. So the answer to your question is what I'm made of: passion, a balance of passion and discipline.
I love that. And it's interesting. I'll also love that uninformed optimism.
Right.
And how almost like the benefit of not knowing what you don't know. Because if you knew it like 4 years later, like, man, I would not have done that.
Well, I mean, you know, from your own experience, if you knew everything you know now about entrepreneurship, you may have not done it, right? It was that spark of passion that perhaps drove you to start that, and then you're like, whoa, this is harder than I thought. Right?
So I think that's interesting to hear, like this, you know, the success stories, the ones of persistence. You know, I want to maybe kind of change gears a little bit and talk about times that have been difficult, and maybe when you failed at something, at different stages of your life or your career, and maybe what you learned from that, how you got through it, maybe how that set you up for a later success. So yeah, let's talk about the hard times.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we all have times in our career that we work with people that we don't click with. I always say that you don't quit a job, you quit a boss. And early during my time at Palladium, I was reporting to someone that it wasn't going well. It was actually really bad, and I just could not do right by this person. And the way they let me know that I wasn't up to par was particularly rough. And it was so bad that it was physically affecting me. I had insomnia. I was feeling down. And the low point for me came in December of 2008 during my year-end review. I, I always been an A student, and I've always been used to getting A's, and I did not get an A at this review. And I got some comments about my future at the firm that made me wonder about myself, about my career, and I'm not sure how much of this bad review was about my style versus the actual quality of my work. But you know, this was another moment where I was staring at the abyss, questioning myself and questioning my career choices. So that I remember that was at the end of the year, and we went on a holiday with my family, and I went on a long walk with my dad. And when things get tough in my life, I like connecting with people that I love, and that gives me strength. It helps me kind of regroup. And there is a quote that is often misattributed to Albert Einstein that says that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So the person that I was working with wasn't going to change. I had to change. Some people, you squeeze them, they fold. Others focus. And I had to focus not only on work or on myself. I needed to build my confidence. So in 2009, I made some changes. I looked to my peers to see who was having success and what were they doing. I was more aggressive in meetings. I started showing up to meetings that I wasn't invited to. Was very strategic about my relationships at work and outside of work. And I really raised the quality of everything I did. And one day, I remember, this person came to berate me. And I don't know I'm sure you've seen The Matrix. You know that scene where the bullets are coming to Neo, but
He's like,
sort of he's
dodging it.
I felt like that, like the comments just were kind of going right through me, and that it felt so good that I felt like, wow, I turned the corner to this very difficult moment of my life. The story, does have, I guess, a happy ending. At the end of 2009, unrelated to the work thing, but I got engaged in early 2010. I married the love of my life. I received a promotion, and this person left the firm.
So it was a good year.
So it was a good year, but just to kind of take it all the way back, what did I learn? I think that you show up for the moments to give us a chance to see what we're made of. And when someone squeezes you, you don't fold, you focus.
Do you think you've always been that way in terms of when someone squeezes you, you don't fold, you focus? Are there times maybe, maybe college or before when you realize like, oh, that's like, I can take pressure, or did you just develop that later on?
No, I would say that I haven't always been that way. And actually, as you asked me that question, it reminded me that perhaps another thing that I that I would think about, an attribute that has worked well for me in my life, is recognizing areas where I am not good at. And so I would say that I used to probably back in high school shy away from these moments because feeling that pressure didn't feel good. And I recognized that I was missing opportunities by shying away, I taking the safer path. And so so no, I don't think I was always was that way, but I did recognize that as an issue, and it was something that I worked on to overcome.
What advice would you give to the 21-year-old version of yourself?
So this is actually something that I articulated recently, but I think it's something that it really resonates with me. If you look at what happens to you, any event, what happens to your life, there's so much that you can't control. We can't control that there's a pandemic. You can't control many of the things that happen at work, in your career, in your life, in your love life. But what you can control, and what is your choice, is how you react to it. And I think that with some more years under my belt, being able to do introspecting and thinking, being more in control of my emotions and knowing how to react is something that I wish I could tell my younger self. And I think that I think I would have maybe had more hair now if I wasn't as stressed as I was back then.
Well, speaking of kind of, back then in the earlier versions of yourself, who would you say that you admire the most? Maybe it's somebody in your family or in your work. Like, who do you admire the most?
Sure, I would usually say my father, but I would have to say my grandfather has had a profound influence in my life. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Romania, and at 8 years old, he left the country because that was the beginning of World War II in all of Europe, and he went to live with some family in Colombia. He, obviously at that time there wasn't email or I don't think there were phones, and so he used to write letters to his parents, who stayed back to, take care of the family business. And the last letters he received from them were written in toilet paper, and many years later he went back and learned that his parents were taken by the Nazis and killed in one of the death marches. My grandfather started selling ties door to door, and he always had an extremely entrepreneurial spirit. And from Colombia, he went to Ecuador, where he had a number of hardware businesses. And then he met my grandmother, who is still alive, and the courtship was very fast, and they got married. And my grandfather went on to build a very large, conglomerate with manufacturing businesses and real estate businesses. And his claim to fame was a transportation business where he would buy old buses from the US and refurbish them to make them public transportation buses in Peru. He later invested in an airline, which was a huge disaster, but it wasn't until the dictatorship of the late 70s where all his businesses were taken away. It's funny, I always wonder what would have happened if my grandfather would have come to the US. Yeah, I mean, instead of Rockefeller Center, maybe it would have been Brujis Center. But all his businesses were taken away except for the one building in downtown Peru, and that was a building that he worked until the last day of his life, and it actually paid for my college. And I wish my grandfather was around to see what I'm doing today, because I feel a profound connection to him. Because even though I'm not an entrepreneur like you are or like he was, I see private equity a bit as a institutional entrepreneurship. And in addition to doing originations, I spend a lot of time on transportation and logistics. And I always feel like his experience influenced the interest in that sector.
Well, that kind of brings up the next question I have, which is, what's the story of Marcos Rodriguez, the founder? Like, how would you describe Marcos to people?
Yeah, so Marcos, I would say one word, a trailblazer. 20 years ago, very few, there were pretty much no or very few Hispanic funds existed, and many didn't even think they had the opportunity to be giving a fair hearing to manage any private equity dollars. And I would say that Marcos was one of the pioneers in the sector. He is a Cuban immigrant who left Cuba during the revolution. In a way, similar story to my grandfather, in that his parents lost everything they had. And he came to the US, where his mother worked at as a pharmacist at Columbia Presbyterian, and his father was a waiter at the plaza. But it was very important to them that his kids, including Marcos, have an opportunity to achieve the American dream, so to speak, and pursue a higher education. Marcos did engineering at Columbia, and then started his career at I think it was GE, and then moved to Joseph Littlejohn and Levy, JLL, where he started his career in private equity. And in '97, he spun out to start Palladium. And Palladium, I think, has a long history of having diversity and inclusion at the forefront of everything we do. And I would say that Marcos has been one of the most ardent champions of diversity and inclusion in the private equity space and the investment community as a whole. And we often say that Palladium is one of the first, and we believe is one of the largest Hispanic-focused minority and women-owned funds in the US.
Can you talk a little bit more about diversity? Because I think the media is given a lot of attention, and I think our industry is given a lot of attention to women in private equity. It is awesome that it is getting this much coverage. It is front of people's minds. I think also because of the past year, African Americans have gotten, it's now that discussion is right in the forefront of people's minds, corporations, investing. What I don't think we hear a lot about is Hispanics in private equity, Hispanics in investment banking, finance. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about, what are some facts and figures? What does diversity mean? How does the firm give back? How do you give back? Love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So look, in my journey, I've had a lot of help along the way, and to me, that concept, Jordan, that you mentioned about giving back is essential, and it's part of who we are as a firm. It's part of who I am, and I want to do my part to pave the way for more women and minorities to get where they want to go. And something that I am very passionate about, and this is something that I wasn't able to participate in through my experience at Palladium, is my work with the New America Alliance, or NAA for short. The NAA is an advocacy organization that focuses on the advancement of women and minorities, particularly Hispanics, in corporate America. And talk about the some of the facts and figures. 70% women and minorities represent 70% of the population, but they only manage less than 2% of the total capital available. So there is a huge imbalance. And one of the phrases that I've adopted from being involved with New America Alliance is that I strongly believe that access to capital is the last frontier of the civil rights movement. And in today's economy, capital catalyzes change and creates opportunity. And I think, and my partners think as well, that private equity can be a force for good. Through our investors at Palladium, we serve over 3 million beneficiaries, and these people are teachers, firefighters, civil servants, police officers across the US that have worked very hard during their entire lives and depend on their pensions for their retirement. And we take that as a sacred trust. And so to us, that's what, when I go to work, that's who I think I'm working for. We don't see our investors as monolithic institutions. We see it as our parents, our grandparents that work very hard to save for their retirement. And we that to us is a sacred trust. And it's the reason we wake up in the morning. Then when it comes to Palladium, I mentioned earlier that we're a women and minority owned fund. And 72% of Palladium is women or diverse. 62% of Palladium senior team is female or diverse. And then we recently established an initiative that all of our boards will have to have 2 minority folks and 2 women, okay? And we are on track to having 100% of our boards accomplish those statistics by the first quarter of next year. And then let me finish with giving back. We obviously believe in generating outstanding returns to our investors, but it goes beyond that. Is our employees, our communities, and we and so we think about it as sort of stakeholder capitalism, and giving back to us is a moral obligation. And we have recently donated, my partners and I, $1 million to local charities and hospitals and schools in New York. And we've also worked with our companies to do the same in the communities where they operate.
So let's go deeper into that. Like, how do you have a direct impact personally? Like, what do you do to make your community better?
So what I do specifically is I'm in the board of the New America Alliance, and the New America Alliance focuses on access to capital, and part of the work is providing a forum for emerging or women-owned minority managers to be able to, raise money and manage capital. The New America also has a scholarship program where we work with young high school students to make sure they have a good access to education. We also, through the work we do with the New America Alliance, we work on legislative projects to make sure that through legislator we drive more diversity and inclusion.
So it kind of sounds like one of the themes here is, they're like being an outsider, and whether it's 60 or 70%, I forget the figure, but only controlling 2% of the capital, or or even back with your SAT and like having to find your way in and feeling like you never fit in that box. And what does that idea mean to you, of being an outsider? Do you think that's an accurate accurate observation?
I would definitely think it's an accurate observation. I just think about my background. There's just not a lot of people who were born in Mexico, raised in Argentina, and are from Peru and live in the US.
Yeah.
So in pretty much every circle that I'm in, I always feel a little bit like an outsider because I'm just I'm not I'm from so many places, and I felt as an outsider throughout. When I was in Argentina, I was, my parents had a different accent than everyone else, and I was from Mexico, and then I moved to the US, and I still have a thick Brooklyn accent, and I would say earlier in my life, I always sort of yearn to belong, and have that sense of belonging, and so always trying to find areas to relate to people, but I always felt that it was hard, and I think that was accentuated when I came to Wall Street, which, as you know, Wall Street it's dominated by white males, and so that I really felt that was sometimes an obstacle, because it's easy for people to relate to people that think like themselves, and so many times you see those people getting opportunity because you just have that familiarity. And I won't lie to you, I think I think going to Palladium and working with a lot of people with a similar background to mine was a big appeal to me, okay? Because I felt that I belong at Palladium, and I think that's one of the great attributes about my firm, is that it provides that environment that perhaps other places don't. I think since
I think that's also interesting, because when in the companies that you invest in as well, the founders or the management teams that you're working with, it feels that you belong there. There is a common thread of a background.
Absolutely. I mean, so where I was gonna go, Jordan, is that over time, I try to turn that sort of uncomfortable feeling of being an outsider into an asset. Okay, and I think there's two advantages. One we talked about earlier, which is that ability to find creative solutions, because I think that because of my background, it's non-traditional, I bring creative solutions to the table. And then the other thing that I have found is that being an outsider makes people underestimate you. And so that's something that where you can take an advantage. I would say when it comes to investing, just to answer your question more directly, we've invested over $1 billion behind the U.S. Hispanic market. And oftentimes when we're sitting in front of an entrepreneur that owns a business and that entrepreneur is Hispanic or relates to the Hispanic community, that gives us an advantage when it comes to making an investment, and we can connect with that person. And private equity is a game of inches, and whenever you can establish a connection, it gives you an advantage.
That is awesome. I really like that concept of winning deals, winning LPs, building meaningful relationships, and all the different stakeholders are in the market. It's a game of inches, and it's a game of 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
It's a long-term game. It's a long-term game.
One of the questions that kind of came up as we were going through this is, it's interesting how introspective you are and how much you've thought about your path and the choices you've made, the mistakes you've made, the successes, the ups and the downs. But what I wonder now is, do you feel that you are the best version of yourself right now? Or what does the best version of you look like?
So absolutely not. I do not think I'm the best version of myself. And a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, I shared with my team a few principles that I want to live by, and I want my team to live by. And I don't know if I remember all of them, but the first one is the concept of Kaizen. Kaizen is a principle used by Toyota or pioneered by Toyota, which is the concept is of always being improving yourself. So just a little bit like, about our founding fathers in the US, the pursuit of happiness. I think I'm always pursuing the best version of myself. And I think it would be very sad if I say, you know what, I made it. There's nothing else I can do. there's no more room for improvement. So no, I think that,
Well, what does the next version of you look like? So, you're now a partner. Things that you've asked some next version, but like, what does the next version look like? Not necessarily from a career perspective, but from a holistic view of yourself. Like, what do you want to be?
Yeah, I mean, so look, I think you just mentioned the word coasting, and coasting. Whenever I feel any semblance of coasting, it's a very uncomfortable feeling for me. And so coasting is not something. It gives me like a sensation of vertigo. So it happens at work. Whenever I think that we don't have a lot to do, I challenge my team to think of ways of where can we do better, add value, etc. So in terms of myself, I love what we're doing at Palladium. One of our objectives is to change the private equity industry. And part of what we want to do is become a we want to grow. We're currently managing 3 billion. We want to get to $100 billion in 10 years, and that's a very ambitious goal. I mean, we've done it before. 20 years ago, we were 100 million, and we grew 30-fold to 3 billion today. So now we want to grow the same amount, but instead of in 20 years, 10 years. And so that's going to bring a new set of challenges and a new set of skill sets that I think, I think investing will always be part of what I do as a professional in private equity. But, in terms of going through that transition of growing and transforming the firm, I think will not just drive a new version of myself, but demand one.
Seems like you live very intentionally or actively thinking about, just always improving, that Kaizen mindset. Are there any kind of quotes or phrases that have kind of guided how you live?
Yeah, there's actually a bunch. And in my office, I have my whiteboard, and in the whiteboard, I have a number of private equity lessons. And
how many are on there?
I think there's like 13. I forget exactly how many they are, but I always
the Brujis Guide to Private Equity Principles.
Yes, the guide to private equity, and these are all phrases that at some point in my career they have come into play, and I only write it down whenever I feel I can tie it to an experience that I've had. There's one that actually has been very important throughout my career. And, at the end of the day, private equity is a business of relationships. And one of the things that has helped me understand how people think and why people do things is a quote, which I think was that Gandhi said it, which is, action expresses priorities. Mm-hmm. And so whenever I try to, in private equity, you're in negotiations all the time. You're dealing with a lot of strong-willed people, and whenever I want to understand why is someone doing what they're doing or acting the way they're acting, I look at their actions, and that's a good guide for me to understand. Because when you find that understanding, and when you're able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, I think is when you are able to find common ground and get the deal through, or that tough conversation, or what have you, the best way possible.
Man, that is awesome. Action expresses priorities. That, I think, is a fantastic way to conclude this. That's such a powerful, simple concept that I think it's sometimes difficult, when we're being thrown with so many different priorities, so many different actions, different people, different companies, etc., life, just like, show me the actions. Like, you want to know what's important to you? Let me show you the actions of what we have done.
Yep.
That's awesome.
I agree with that.
We have covered a lot of ground on this, and I cannot wait to get this out there. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.